A major milestone for the president today marks Trump's 6 months in office. Here with me is Professor of Political Science at Wright State University, Dr. Lee Hanna. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So we talked a little bit yesterday, and you sent me a book via text.
I did.
kind of talking about Trump's first 6 months.
Yes.
A lot has happened in just 6 months.
It has, yes, and it's hard to be succinct when you talk about an eighth of his term at this point. I think one way to think of it is what are those things that he's done that are kind of a typical Republican presidential move. So the Neil Gorsuch nomination would be one of the better examples. Efforts to move on health care, which many were blocked, and then unrolling a lot of Obama's regulations. Many executive orders were pulled a 180, kind of overnight, and in that way he has had a significant effect, depending on where you are in the country. Then there are those moves that are a bit further to the base, and he has made the media the story, and that's been a very interesting strategy to take. A lot of people asked, is he going to pivot? Is he going to move to the center? Is he even going to work across the aisle? And what we've seen is that he has really challenged the media at every turn, challenged his political opponents, continues to bring up the Clinton campaign and everything else. And so in that way, many in his base or further to the right love it, but it's probably hurting him with independents, as we talked about with the approval ratings when I was in here last time.
Absolutely, but not only that, he seems to, you mentioned self-control, and we're talking about Twitter and the tweets.
Yes, and that's even coming from Republican members of Congress. You can find many quotes recently, Ben Sasse, Trey Gowdy, Lindsey Graham, where they feel like they're moving forward on a policy. They've got opinion on their side, and the president will tweet either about the issue at hand or even something extraneous. He'll attack an MSNBC anchor, and it gets them kind of knocked off track. And so that has led to some frustration, but it doesn't seem like he's willing to change. He thinks that all things even, that it's better for him to continue to be combative like that. Something
interesting, because the tweeting and social media is something we haven't seen in other presidencies. Do you expect him to continue that throughout the rest of his presidency?
He's been so unpredictable at every point, and so underestimated at every point. So in some ways, I think all bets are kind of out there still. All options still seem to be on the table. The way he's dealt with the health care fallout this week has suggested he's willing to just let it fail, to repeal and do nothing, or to work with Democrats. And that's kind of how he moves. He moves very quickly and puts out a lot of options. So I think it's still time will tell in terms of what he becomes. I will say it's still just an eighth of the way through the term. I read some recaps of the 100 days of Clinton, of Bush, of Reagan, of Obama. And, in many cases, you read all of those and you think, gosh, that really isn't consistent with what the rest of the presidency became. So it still is a bit early, and, so we'll see where things go.
You think at some point he could turn a corner?
Perhaps, yes. And one thing in my book that we did talk about, the looming issue that you cannot ignore is Russia, right? And so that has been, I think the New York Times called it the briar patch you can't get away from. And that has continuously been another factor that has maybe made it more difficult for him to achieve anything in the legislative front, especially. And so as long as that is still a viable story, as long as there is smoke, then people will be paying attention, and even his allies will be slow to work with him. So that is something to watch as they start looking at their own electoral fortunes with the midterms coming up.
Now, do you expect, I know that the Russia situation hasn't gone away. Do we expect that to kind of continue, like you said, where there's smoke?
Yes. So, I will say that there's reckless speculation that sometimes happens from his opponents where they don't know everything and they just start to put together a story that isn't really out there. There isn't evidence for that. But then there's also kind of recklessly downplaying that you're seeing from the right, as if this is nothing. And this is the president's son's tweets. I mean, he tweeted out this email that says that they were willing to meet and take information that would harm candidate Clinton. So we're still looking for what is completely true, but the fact that the Senate is bringing them in, the fact that there's a special investigation, it's certainly not fake news. It is a real story, and it may not be as big as people think it is, but we just don't know that yet. And it continues, just the speculation continues to hurt him.
All right, well, we'll see what happens. He's got a lot of presidency left.
He does, yes, he sure does.
All right, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We greatly appreciate it.